never allow her to come to harm. And as for the other, she turned out to be an even more useful hostage than first anticipated. But lately, Vaniel had begun challenging the king's wishes in spite of his loved one's precarious positions, though always in small ways that could never quite be construed as outright rebellion. Until that necklace, a harmless gem, meant only to torment his father. Or was it? The king allowed himself a moment of unfettered speculation. While he had no proof, nor even the smallest shred of evidence, he knew these things were linked. Vaniel, the gem, the princess's flight, and the raven's disappearance. Slowly and with effort, the king throttled his rage at these setbacks and leashed it to be used at a later time. Anger weakened the mind and dulled the senses. Amidst the shambles of his original plan, he began to build the framework of another. The chances of its success were not as encouraging as he would like, and time was no longer on his side. But life as he knew it had never favored the weak, nor the easily defeated. He was not yet ready to give up, not when the prize being offered was still much closer to hand than he'd ever dreamed possible when he was young and overlooked, mocked for the weakness of his person and his magic. And besides, he still had a weapon or two at his disposal. Perhaps Farhall would be less inclined to defiance when the lives of her people were hanging by a thread, when the king held a knife to the throat of the loyal guardsmen now languishing in cells beneath the palace, and when the armies of Garimore poured into the streets of Farhall's capital city of Arendar. Perhaps then Soren and his troublesome daughter would be brought to realize the folly of challenging Garimore's king. But much preparation would be needed, and the king sighed deeply as he regretted the loss of his raven once more. But no matter. When all was done, and he attained his rightful place, he would have more than enough time and authority to hunt down even the raven and chain his power yet again. He would chain them all, everyone whose magic had a threat to the strength and security of his rule. But that day would not come through wishing or regrets. So the king left the tower behind and began the task of returning order to his household and his kingdom. One day, he would bring that order to the world, all in good time. Chapter 1.
You did what?
Unlike the last time they'd argued in this very room, King Soren of Farhall whirled from his contemplation of the window to stare at Leisa in evident horror. She stared back. "I stole a horse and came as quickly as I could to warn you," she repeated. It was a pitifully insipid way to describe her last few days. Never mind her last few weeks. Leisa had done her best to condense what she'd learned in Garimore into a few essential points. King Melgar of Garimore wanted to rule Farhall. Even more than he wanted to rule Farhall, he wanted to rid the world of mages. And he was a flaming hypocrite who wasn't above using dark magic to get what he wanted. Also, his son, Prince Vaniel, was an irritating fop with a hidden agenda who would drive Princess Everrain of Farhall to an early grave should they be so foolish as to marry. Most important of all, however, was the fact that King Melgar had caught one of Princess Everrain's guards spying on his men, and had decided this gave him the right to demand an immediate marriage to cement the alliance between their kingdoms. That, or he would declare war. And in a war, Farhall would lose. Not only lose, it would be completely and utterly destroyed, giving Melgar free rein to slaughter mages and oppress any non-humans within Farhall's borders. And out of all these grim bits of news, the part King Soren seemed most concerned with was Leisa stealing a horse. It wasn't even a very good horse, she muttered under her breath. Really? Had he not heard a thing she'd said? Since leaving Kyrion in the forest, Leisa had spent most of the miles considering what, exactly, she intended to tell her king. She was filthy, confused, and heartsick, and she'd been traveling on so little sleep, she'd almost blundered her way into the first guard post wearing her own face. Once she shared her story with the stunned guards, she'd been delayed by the lack of a spare horse, then delayed again by her escort's insistence on coddling her. It had been 15 days since she'd escaped Garimore's palace in the middle of the night, but she'd made it home in time. She'd reached Arendar, Farhall's capital, before...